Trust ain't given. It's earned. And once you lose it, there's no getting it back. My name's Martin Ellis. 58 years old. Grew up working cattle outside Amarillo, Texas. Served in the Marines, ran missions in places most people can't pronounce, and came back knowing one thing: weak men fold, strong men build. Built a security firm from nothing, made my money the hard way, and thought I had life figured out. Then came Eden. She was younger, sharp-tongued, with a wild streak that kept things interesting. When we met, she liked that I was a man who didn't make excuses. That wore off somewhere along the way. These days, every conversation had an edge to it. You never take me anywhere nice anymore. You're always working. Maybe if you paid attention, you'd see I'm miserable. Every fight sounded the same, always circling back to how she felt trapped, how she gave up her own dreams. I figured it was just the way marriages go. Every road gets some potholes. You patch them and keep driving. Then, one night, she left her phone face up on the counter. I wasn't looking for trouble, but I damn sure wasn't gonna ignore it when it landed in my lap. Screen lit up: Samuel, can't stop thinking about earlier. You taste like sin. I stared at it a second, just long enough for the pieces to fall into place. A trainer at the gym. Young, dumb, thinks he's got something special. Probably feeds her every line she wants to hear. I pocketed the phone, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and sat at the kitchen table. The old me, the Marine me, had instincts kicking in: track, isolate, eliminate. But I wasn't a kid anymore, and this wasn't some battlefield in the desert. This was my home. My life. And that meant I had to handle it like a man. Eden came in an hour later, humming to herself, shopping bags on her arm. She saw me sitting there, phone in front of me, and the color drained from her face. That told me everything. She didn't even ask what was wrong. Just sighed, set the bags down, and crossed her arms. You going through my phone now, she said, tone sharp, trying to get the upper hand. I took a slow sip, let the silence hang heavy. Nope, I said. It went off. Screen lit up. She hesitated, eyes darting to the phone. And you taste like sin. I pushed the phone toward her. That what we're doing now? She didn't speak right away, just shifted her weight like she was calculating the best way to spin this. Martin, it's not, eh? Don't. I shook my head. Don't start lying to me. Not when we both know. Her jaw tightened. The guilt was gone now, replaced with something mean. Maybe if you hadn't checked out of this marriage a long time ago, I wouldn't have needed. I barked out a laugh, sharp and humorless. Needed? You needed some kid half your age? I leaned back in my chair, watching her squirm. How long? She set her jaw, arms crossed. Does it matter? I wouldn't ask if it didn't. She shrugged, all defiance now. 6 months. Maybe longer. I nodded slow. No anger. Just a cold weight settling in my chest. You love him? Jesus, Martin? What kind of question is that? A simple one. She scoffed. It's not about love. It's about feeling alive. About someone seeing me, not just passing me by every damn day like I'm a piece of furniture. I studied her a long moment. She really believed she was the victim here. I could have yelled. I could have thrown things. Could have dragged that punk kid out of the gym and beaten the life out of him. But I didn't do any of that. Because Eden wasn't worth it. Neither was Samuel. I stood up, pushing my chair back. You want to feel alive? You'll get your chance. I picked up her phone and tossed it to her. Pack a bag. Get out. She blinked. You're serious? As a heart attack. She didn't move. Just stared at me like she expected a different ending, like she thought I'd fight for her, beg her to stay. Where am I supposed to go? I shrugged. Not my problem. She swallowed hard, then grabbed the phone and stormed upstairs. I heard drawers slamming, the zip of a suitcase. I just stood there, gripping my glass, watching the ice melt. 15 minutes later, she came down with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Paused at the door. You really don't care, do you? I looked her in the eye steady. Not anymore. She hesitated like she wanted to say something else, but she didn't. Just opened the door and walked out. The moment she was gone, I exhaled slow, letting the weight settle. I wasn't broken. I wasn't shaking. I was just done. And now it was time to make sure she felt the same. I stood there a long time after the door shut. Just me, the dim light over the kitchen table, and the sound of the clock ticking. My bourbon had gone warm, but I finished it anyway. Didn't taste it. Didn't care. I wasn't the kind of man to waste good whiskey. The house felt different. Quieter. Lighter, almost. That was the funny thing about betrayal. Once you saw the truth, you couldn't unsee it. And once you cut the dead weight, you started realizing just how much it had been dragging you down. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and hit a name I hadn't called in a while. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Landon's. It's Martin. A pause. Then, figured I'd be hearing from you soon. I exhaled through my nose, running a hand over my beard. That right? You ain't been by in weeks. Either you found religion or something went south. I let out a short, humorless chuckle. Yeah. Something like that. You open. Always. I grabbed my keys and left the house without looking back. The drive to the Iron Stag was muscle memory, 10 minutes down a long, dark stretch of highway, past open fields and gas stations with flickering neon signs. The bar sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building with a faded wooden sign, the kind of place where you didn't get cocktails with umbrellas, just straight pours and straight talk. Inside, it was the same as always, dim lighting, country music low on the jukebox, a handful of regulars nursing drinks at the bar. Landon stood behind it, wiping down a glass like he'd been born with a rag in his hand. Stocky, balding, wore thick-rimmed glasses that made him look half professor, half bouncer. I slid onto a stool, nodded. Bourbon. He poured without a word, setting the glass in front of me. I took a sip, letting it burn. You gonna tell me, or am I supposed to guess? He asked. I rolled the glass between my fingers, watching the amber liquid catch the light. Eden's gone. Landon didn't blink. That right? Found out she's been running around with some gym rat. He made a low sound in his throat. Not quite a laugh, more like something he'd seen too many times before. Damn shame. I nodded, took another sip. You lose your temper? He asked. I shook my head. Not worth it. He gave a slow, approving nod. Good. We sat in silence for a while. That was Landon's way. He let a man take his time, get his thoughts in order before pushing. Finally, he said, so what's the plan? I took my time answering. First steps, talking everything back. House is mine. Money's mine. She made her choice, she can live with it. Landon smirked, nodding. Cold. I shrugged. Fair. Another sip. Another pause. Then he said, she comin' after anything? I let out a breath through my nose. Probably. Women like her don't leave quiet. Landon grunted. Lock it down. I already did. He gave me a long look like he was making sure I wasn't bullshitting. Then he reached under the bar, pulled out a pack of smokes, tapped one loose, and stuck it between his lips. He didn't light it, just rolled it between his fingers. Now he said, voice slow, deliberate. What about the boy? I felt my jaw tighten. You gonna let him walk? I hadn't decided yet. The old me would have tracked him down and taught him a lesson. The new me? I wasn't sure. But one thing was clear, he wasn't getting away clean. I got something in mind, I said finally. Landon gave a knowing nod, then gestured with his chin. Then you best get to it. I downed the rest of my drink, dropped a bill on the counter, and stood. As I walked out, Landon called after me. Remember, Martin, don't strike when you're mad. Strike when it hurts. I didn't turn around. Just pushed open the door and stepped into the night, the cool air settling over me like fresh resolve. By the time I got in my truck, I had a plan. Eden wanted to feel alive? She was about to learn what dying slow felt like. I woke early the next morning, same as always. Muscle memory. Didn't matter that Eden was gone, didn't matter that everything was different now. The sun still came up and a man still had to put his boots on and handle business. First thing I did was sit down at my desk, open my laptop, and start making calls. Bank first. I had our accounts locked down before Eden even woke up in whatever cheap motel she'd landed in. Everything was in my name anyway. I made sure she'd be paying for her own damn breakfast. Next was the lawyer. Martin Carlson, a guy I'd known for years. Solid, sharp, didn't waste words. She doesn't work, I said, cutting to the chase. No income, no career. She gave that up by choice. She won't get a dime if I have my way. Martin exhaled through his nose, flipping through paperwork on the other end of the line. You kept everything separate before marriage? Damn right. Then she's got nothing but what you're willing to give. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sun creep over the fence line outside. I'm not willing to give shit. Martin chuckled. Figured as much. I'll get the papers ready. She'll fight it, but she won't win. She doesn't have the stomach for a real fight, I said. She'll bark, but she'll fold. That's the goal, Martin said. Anything else? One thing. I hesitated, tapping my fingers on the desk. The kid. Samuel. What about him? Can I touch him legally? Martin was silent a beat, then cleared his throat. Not unless you want to spend a few nights in county. I let out a slow breath. That's what I figured. But Martin added, there are other ways to make a man regret his choices. That was all I needed to hear. By noon, Eden was blowing up my phone. I didn't answer. Let her stew in it. She must have checked her bank and realized the well had run dry. I let her calls go to voicemail, didn't even bother listening. Instead, I drove into town, pulled into the lot at Iron Stag Gym. I knew Samuel would be there, men like him didn't have real responsibilities. His whole life revolved around a mirror and a protein shake. I stepped inside, the scent of sweat and cheap rubber mats hitting me immediately. The place was busy, music thumping low over the speakers, weights clanking. I didn't need to look long. He was near the squat rack, laughing with a couple of other trainers, cocky as ever. I walked straight to him, stopped a few feet away. He turned, saw me, and his smirk faded just a little. Hey. I stared him down, arms loose at my sides. You Samuel? His eyes flicked around the gym. He knew exactly who I was. Yeah. Who's asking? Martin Ellis. I let the name sink in, watched his face twitch. You know who I am. His shoulders squared, trying to puff himself up. Look, man, I don't know what I took a step forward. Shut up. His mouth clamped shut. The other trainers backed away slightly, pretending to look busy. I lowered my voice just enough so only he could hear. You made a mistake. Samuel swallowed. Listen, I said shut up. I let the silence hang. I'm not gonna touch you. Not here. But you're done. He frowned, forced out a laugh. What does that mean? It means you're finished in this town. You like training housewives and selling bootleg supplements? That's over. No one will hire you. No one will train with you. I leaned in, voice dropping even lower. I have friends in places you don't even know exist. I can make you disappear without laying a hand on you. His Adam's apple bobbed. That's illegal. I smiled, slow and cold. No, it ain't. Just good business. He shifted his weight, eyes darting toward the exit like he was measuring his chances. I clapped him on the shoulder, firm enough to make him flinch. I'd start looking for a new career. Then I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there, pale and sweating. By the time I got back in my truck, I had one missed call from Eden and a text message. Eden, you took the money? Are you serious? I let her wait a few minutes before replying. Me, dead serious. No response. I started the truck, adjusted my rear view, and pulled out of the lot. The real fun was just getting started. By the time I got back home, Eden was waiting. She was standing in the driveway, arms crossed, foot tapping, her duffel bag still slung over her shoulder like she hadn't quite figured out where to land. I killed the engine and stepped out, shutting the truck door slow. She was already talking before I made it halfway up the walk. You froze the accounts. I nodded. Sure did. Her jaw tightened. You don't have the right? I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. Eden, every cent in that account came from me. Not a dime was yours. You think you get to step out and still live off my work? I tilted my head. Ain't how it works. She huffed, folding her arms tighter. I gave up everything for this marriage. Yeah? I let my eyes drift over her. Looks like you found something else pretty quick. That hit, but she covered it with a sharp breath, trying to keep the fight alive. You don't get to decide I have nothing. I'll get a lawyer. I stepped past her, headed for the door. You do that. She grabbed my arm. Martin. I turned slow, giving her one shot to make this worth my time. Her face shifted, her tone softer. I don't want this to get ugly. I just looked at her. It got ugly the second you spread your legs for another man. Her mouth snapped shut. I yanked open the door, stepping inside. You want something, have your lawyer call mine. Then I shut the door in her face. I watched through the window as she stood there, seething. Then finally she turned, stalking to her car and speeding off. Good. Let her run. I had more important things to do. The next morning, I drove back into town, grabbed a coffee, and made my way over to the office of Jim Ellis and Associates. My security firm. It had my name on the door, my reputation behind it, and a staff that knew how to handle problems. Inside, my right-hand man, Matthew Graham, was already waiting. Mid-40s, built like a brick, no patience for nonsense. He leaned against my desk, arms crossed. You gonna tell me what's going on, or am I gonna have to drag it out of you? I set my coffee down, took my seat, and met his stare. Eden cheated. I kicked her out. Now I'm making sure she don't land on her feet. Matthew whistled low. Damn. I nodded. Damn right. He exhaled, scratching his jaw. You want this loud or quiet? I smirked. Loud enough for her to feel it. Quiet enough to keep me out of court. He grinned. My kind of job. We spent the next hour going through the steps. First, we ensured Eden had no access to the business, no stake in anything. Then, I made a few calls to local real estate agents. Eden wasn't gonna get a nice cushy place to settle in. If she wanted to start over, she was gonna have to do it the hard way. By the time we were finished, I leaned back, exhaling slow. Now, let's talk about Samuel. Matthew chuckled. You handle him already? I nodded. Gave him a heads up. But I want him done. Matthew's eyes glinted. You want him gone, or you want him suffering? I smirked. He ain't worth jail time, but I want him to learn. Matthew leaned in, voice lowering. I got a couple of old friends who run gyms in Dallas. I'll make a few calls. By the end of the week, he won't be able to get a job training squirrels. I nodded, satisfied. That's why I keep you around. He grinned, standing. That and my good looks. I snorted, shaking my head. Get to work. As Matthew left, I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. One by one, the pieces were falling into place. Eden had lost her home, her comfort, her money. Samuel was about to lose his career, his reputation. And me? I was just getting started. The fallout came fast. By the end of the week, Eden was out of options. Word had spread through Rockwell like wildfire. Small towns worked that way. People talked. Women whispered behind their hands at the grocery store. Men shook their heads over beers at the Iron Stag. Nobody outright said anything to her face, but that was worse. She walked into places and felt it, that shift in the air when people saw her coming. The polite nods that didn't come anymore. The invitations that dried up overnight. She tried to act like it didn't bother her, kept her head high, pretended she didn't care. But I knew better. She cared plenty. Matthew's calls had worked like a charm on Samuel. By Friday, he'd lost every training gig he had. No gym in town would touch him. Even the big chains in Dallas had gotten the memo. He must have figured something was coming because he packed up and left town without a word. Just like that, he was gone, scuttling away like a rat before the real storm hit. I wasn't done, though. Sunday morning, I woke up early, put on a clean shirt, and took a drive. The road to Austin was quiet, stretched out ahead of me under a sky the color of old denim. 2 hours later, I pulled up to a familiar white brick house in a quiet, well-off neighborhood. Eden's parents' place. I killed the engine, stepped out, and knocked. A minute later, the door cracked open, and Joseph Edwards, her father, stared at me from behind the screen. 70-something retired judge, still carried himself like he was on the bench. Martin. His voice was even, unreadable. Morning, Joseph. We need to talk. He studied me for a second, then pushed the door open wider. Come in. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and furniture polish, same as always. Abigail, Eden's mother, was in the kitchen. She glanced up when I walked in, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and nodded. Coffee? I shook my head. No, ma'am. Joseph motioned toward the den. Let's sit. I followed him in, taking the chair across from him. Abigail came in a moment later, perched on the couch, arms folded tight. Joseph sighed, rubbing his forehead. I take it this isn't a social visit. No, sir. I met his eyes, steady. I figured you should hear it from me. Eden cheated. She's out. Abigail let out a sharp breath, her face pinching. Joseph just nodded slow, like that confirmed something he already suspected. She told us you were being unreasonable, he said. I let out a short laugh. She say why? His mouth pulled tight. She mentioned she'd met someone else. That's one way to put it. I leaned forward, forearms resting on my knees. I didn't come here to badmouth her. She made her bed, and I made sure she's lying in it. I just figured you ought to know the truth before she spins it her way. Abigail shook her head, looking down at her lap. Jesus. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, then let out a heavy sigh. What happens now? Nothing, I said. She's got no money. No place. No job. I don't know where she's staying, and I don't care. She's on her own. Abigail swallowed hard. She's our daughter. I met her eyes. She made her choices. She flinched but didn't argue. Joseph drummed his fingers against the chair's armrest. What do you expect us to do? I shrugged. That's your call. But if you take her in, you better make damn sure she doesn't think that means she won. Abigail exhaled through her nose, looking away. Joseph just nodded like he understood something deeper than what was being said. I stood up. That's all I had to say. Joseph rose too, sticking out his hand. I shook it, firm, and for the first time in years I saw something like respect in his eyes. Martin, he said, voice low, measured. I was wrong about you. I nodded. Appreciate that. I turned to go, but Abigail's voice stopped me at the door. Martin. I glanced back. She hesitated, then said, Are you okay? I held her gaze a moment. Then I nodded once. Yeah, I am. I stepped outside, the sun warm on my face, the weight of the last few weeks settling in my bones. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. For the first time in a long time, I felt like a man with nothing tying him down. And that felt damn good. A week passed. Then another. The dust settled, but Eden didn't. She bounced between places, staying with a friend for a while until that dried up, then trying to get her own spot. But money was tight, and landlords weren't eager to rent to a woman with no income and no stability. She called once, probably her pride wouldn't let her do it more than that. You've made your point, she said, her voice tight like she was holding back her temper. Now can we be adults about this? I leaned against my truck, watching the sunset bleed over the fields. We were supposed to be adults when we got married, Eden. That ship sailed. You left me with nothing, Martin. No, you did that to yourself. She exhaled sharp through her nose. This isn't fair. I shook my head, smirking to myself. Fair left the station when you unbuttoned your jeans for someone else. Silence. She hated that I wasn't giving her anything to work with. Hated even more that she was on the losing end. What do you want? She finally asked. I looked out over the land, over the pastures I'd reclaimed, the life I was rebuilding. I don't want a damn thing from you, Eden. She let out a frustrated breath. I didn't mean to hurt you. I let that sit a moment, let her hear the weight of the words she was saying. Then I said, I don't think you ever cared enough to mean anything, one way or the other. She didn't have an answer for that. Just quiet on the other end of the line. After a beat, I heard a sigh. Goodbye, Martin. She hung up. I slid my phone into my pocket and didn't think about her again. By the end of the month, she packed up and left Rockwell. Moved in with an old college friend in Austin, from what I heard. There was no big scene, no final attempt to fix things. She knew when she'd lost. And me? I got back to work. The ranch needed tending, the business needed running, and I had better things to do than waste time on a woman who never understood what loyalty meant. One night, I stopped by the Iron Stag for a drink. Landon nodded when I walked in, poured my bourbon without a word. A few regulars were scattered around, murmuring about local gossip, cattle prices, and whose truck broke down that week. Matthew slid onto the stool beside me. So that's it, huh? I took a sip. That's it. He nodded, thoughtful. You good with that? I considered it, rolling the glass between my fingers. I am. Landon glanced up from wiping the counter, pushed his glasses up his nose. Then drink your damn whiskey and quit talking about it. Matthew chuckled, clinking his glass against mine. To moving on. I smirked. To being done. We drank. And just like that, the past was exactly where it belonged, behind me. A year passed. The kind of year that changes a man, but only in ways that matter. I built my life back the way I wanted it, no dead weight, no distractions, no looking over my shoulder. The business was thriving, the ranch was steady, and my name still meant something in Rockwell. Eden? She was a ghost. Last I heard, she was still in Austin, working some temp job, hopping from one rental to another. Whatever fire she thought she was chasing had burned out quick. Nobody in town mentioned her anymore. People moved on. So did I. One evening I was out on the porch, watching the sky go gold over the pasture. The air smelled like cut grass and old wood, the kind of scent that sticks with a man longer than any woman ever could. I had a cold beer in one hand, my boots up on the railing, when I heard tires crunching up the drive. A black truck rolled up slow, dust curling behind it. Jackson Ellis, my son, stepped out. 25, same sharp eyes, same solid stance. We'd been distant since his mother passed, life pulling him in one direction and me in another. I set my beer down. Well, I'll be damned. Jackson shut the door, looking around. Place looks different. I nodded. Had some cleaning up to do. He stuffed his hands in his pockets, exhaling slow. Heard about Mom. I waited. She called me a few times. Didn't say much, just trying to get me on her side, I think. I snorted. How'd that work out? His mouth twitched. Didn't. I studied him, the way he stood, the way he carried himself. He was his own man now, but there was still that blood, that instinct. He had my name, my backbone. You here for a reason? I finally asked. Jackson shrugged, looking out at the land, at the setting sun stretching long shadows across the field. Maybe. I nodded, letting the silence settle, comfortable and easy. Got a place for me here? He asked. I didn't answer right away, just took a slow pull from my beer, weighing the question. He knew the answer before I even said it. Always. He nodded, then walked up the porch steps and sat down beside me. We didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. The past was done. The future was wide open. And for the first time in a long damn time, everything was exactly the way it should be.